everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And I'm joined today by artists Angie Lewin and Rebecca Collins, who are showing at the Scottish Gallery in Edinburgh as part of their Welcoming Spring exhibition. Hello, both.
Hi.
So first of all, Angie, start with you. How do you describe your work?
Well, the exhibition that's on at the Scottish Gallery at the moment is all watercolours. I'm also a printmaker, but this shows only watercolours, and it's based on it's botanical art, really. It's plants that I either observe in the wild, or also currently it's also plants that I grow myself as well. Yes, so yeah, I'm basically a painter printmaker, but this is solely a painting show.
Right, okay. And the same question to yourself, Rebecca. How do you describe your work?
I'm a landscape painter. I live on the west coast of Scotland, on the northwest coast, and I'm just really influenced by the landscape around me, the landscape which I live in and I see every day. And that's what I just try and capture and paint.
Well, as we say, the exhibition is a celebration of Scottish nature, or at least nature. How important is that in your work? Rebecca, you start, like you mentioned how important it is. Well,
I don't know, nature, and also weather and light. Not so much plants like Angie, but probably just the vistas and views and the way seasons impact the landscape as well. You know, for example, in autumn we've got a very low light here and a lot of rain. We get a lot of rainbows and mist, and as the temperatures change, and it's lovely just to watch that and to watch the seasons and to celebrate it.
And do you work outside? Do you actually kind of work in nature as well?
Not so much. I mean, I do spend a lot of time outside. Yeah. I do a lot of walking, and we're lucky enough to have a small boat, so we're in the water a lot, or we're outside. And I like gardening, so I do spend a lot of time getting my hands dirty outside in the garden. But no, for the paintings, really, the technique which I've developed over my painting career involves sort of translucent layers on top of each other, and the things I paint are quite temporal, so it's quite hard to do that outside. And also you can get cold and wet.
No, absolutely. What about yourself, Angie? How do you work? How do you approach your work?
Well, a bit like Rebecca, where I am on Speyside, it's also quite hard work sometimes working outdoors. So I do sketch when I'm out walking, and I also sketch in the garden as well. But quite often the way that I sketch is to get down this sort of information that I need before I'm going to make a painting. And so, you know, especially because it's very windy where I am. We're up on the side of a hill by the River Spey, and it's always windy at our house. It doesn't matter if it's still everywhere else, it's always windy at our house. So I'm often maybe just doing pencil sketches and then just make notes about colour or leaves or whatever. And then I tend to work on the watercolours in the studio. And because I've got a lot of wildflowers in the land around the house, and also I'm growing things, I've now got a polytunnel, which means I can grow plants which I wouldn't normally be able to grow here so easily. I can then cut those and bring those into the studio to paint them and create still lifes. So it's a mixture of indoor, outdoor, and again, like Rebecca, I spend a lot of time walking, and for a long time my work was always based on wildflowers. Now, because I'm permanently on Speyside, I like this contrast between the cultivated and the wild. Right. So I grow dahlias and parrot tulips, which is such a contrast to sort of yarrow and plantains and dandelions and sort of less exotic plants. So it's that contrast. So yeah, I think it's a mixture of indoor, in the studio, and outdoor. And also there's the seasonality that Rebecca mentioned as well, that I seem to always be moving on to the next subject because the next thing is coming to flower. So it flows through the seasons in the same way.
It's interesting that both of you, you mentioned gardening and working with plants. So you're not just observing in your work, you're actually involved with nature as well. It's as you said, maybe getting your hands dirty as part of it. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, so,
Is that to Angie?
Yes.
Oh, yes, that's true. I mean, I've always really liked gardening, and I have in the past studied garden design and done worked in people's gardens and things like that. So I really like the physical side of growing plants and observing them as they grow. It's a very corny thing, but to grow something from a seed or a bulb to a flowering plant is always an amazing thing. So I think having that link with the plants that you paint is important, actually, because my work's not botanically accurate, but I think it tries to capture the essence.
And yourself, Rebecca, you said you've got a boat and you go walking, and that kind of interaction, is that crucial to what the end painting is?
I think so, because for me, painting is a way of, and when I was at school, the way I learned was always by writing something down. And so some people learn by audio, and for me, it was always very much having to write something down. And I think painting is a way of almost writing down the landscape, understanding the landscape. And in a way, by doing that, you make it yours in a special way. If I see something which is really beautiful and moves me, it's a way for me to hold that and to mark it and to celebrate it. And so, it's important to be outside and to see these things, and when you see them, to mark them and celebrate them. But that's an important part of my work for me. Sometimes I'll see something and it's breathtakingly beautiful, and might not always have, I usually take a camera with me or something like that. I might always have my camera, but sometimes I think it's almost as nice sometimes not to just to remember it too, that's just lovely, build up a bank of memories. And I think also by being outside, and I mean, I've lived up here for over 30 years now, you kind of know how things start to work. You kind of know how the shadows will start to fall, and how an interesting mist pattern looks, what a special one is, you kind of, you have a good vocabulary of it.
That's really interesting, Rebecca, the idea that, when you maybe make a paint or you create any kind of art, does it always match the moment that you're trying to recreate?
No, but hopefully it might evoke it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you've been where you are for 30 years. Are you there because it's landscape that inspires your art? No,
I moved up here, fell in love and got married.
Pragmatic, rather than artistic. I guess that's fair enough. Yeah. What about yourself, Angie? Are you where you are because it kind of inspires?
Yes, yeah. Well, when we bought the place up here, we were living in North Norfolk. And there's a Scottish link in that my husband's grandfather is Scottish. He's from Edinburgh. So there's always been a family link with Scotland. And so we decided we wanted to spend time in Scotland, initially part-time, but now we've been in Scotland full-time for a long time now. And so initially my work was very East Anglian. Right. And it was always this moving between the two. I got the contrast between the two. But I've been up here, I suppose Speyside, we've had this place on Speyside over 20 years now. And so I do really know it. And so when my work now is almost entirely based on Scotland, really. I mean, there are some East Anglian images because we go back to East Anglia quite a lot, and I do love it there. But I've really got to know this landscape very well, and the seasons are very different. Obviously, they're much shorter. The summer is much shorter, but the nights are longer in the summer, and just the whole way that the seasons progress here is different. And I do the same walks every day, because I have a series of walks because we have a dog. So you always see the plants in the same place just through the seasons. And it is that trying to evoke the sense of place, because here I think of birch trees, rowans, devil's bit scabious, yellow rattle, plants like that. Whereas in East Anglia, there will be things like Alexanders and goat's beard and other sorts of plants. So they're the plants that define Speyside. And also I do like the West Coast a lot. So there's work in the exhibition based on North Uist, because I go there every year. So it's generally the Scottish landscape, actually. And the contrast now between Speyside and the West Coast is very important too, and the similarities.
So you've always responded, your art has always responded to your surroundings, no matter where you've been.
Yes, it has, actually, because when I was very young, I used to draw a lot in the garden. My dad was a very, very keen gardener. And I've got drawings that I did of purple sprouting broccoli and things like that he was growing in the garden. So I've always been a very outdoors person. I've always been a very sort of active person. I've always liked to be doing something. So yeah, I think it was almost inevitable that the two strands came together, and that the environment I'm in. When I was very young, I used to go, I had a school friend at primary school, and we used to go walking, which you'd never do now. We were very young. We were probably 7 or 8. We'd go off for the whole day with sandwiches and sketchbooks and just walk along the canal near where we lived and into the fields, and we'd draw. And I was probably doing that, yes, when I was probably about 7 or 8. So it's very much part of how I've always lived in the world, and how Rebecca described why you'd paint and draw in the country. That rings true completely. It is your way of remembering it and acknowledging its effect on you.
And what about yourself, Rebecca? Have you always reacted or interacted with your surroundings with your art?
I suppose I've always drawn, and I love colour. I've always been very affected by colour. I remember one of my earliest things, my mother gave me a massive big thing of crayons, and I just remember just suddenly feeling that it had so much potential in it, and it was so exciting, you know. And it just gave me, I had to borrow everyone's before that, you know, so to have my own was amazing, to be able to do what I wanted to do without having to rely on anyone else. So that, yeah, so I suppose I've always been, you know, I've always loved that, and I've always loved colour, and I've always loved drawing. But I think it was moving up here after I left art college and just sort of thinking, well, I need to be creating, and I need, what can I do, you know? And then just seeing the landscape around me, and you can't help but be inspired by it, and you can't help but be influenced by it, you know. It's so raw sometimes, you know. You must see that in Speyside too, Angie, you know. It's up in Scotland, there's a lot of weather, and it's a lot of, you know, it's very exciting. And I think just learning how to, bit by bit, slowly learning how to, you know, like the language of it, and how to paint it, and what made me happy when I was painting it, and what I wanted to achieve, you know, the things I wanted to achieve when I was painting the landscape, you know. So yeah, it was a process, and it took a long time.
And partly the reason I asked that question is one of my favourite painters was Joan Airdley, and the way that she went from these urban Glasgow scenes and these little tykes that she would paint and everything, to the work she did at Catterline, which is, as you say, Rebecca, was all about the weather, almost, you know, really quite stark differences. And that idea that no matter what your surroundings are, that artistically, you know, there's this need to kind of reflect it or show it or share it with other people. There are other artists involved in the exhibition. You've got Joe Hogan, who's a basket maker, and Katie Watson, who is jewellery, I think. Is that right? Have you seen their work? Have you, as part of the exhibition, or not, Angie?
Yes, yeah. it was quite a frantic sort of setting up of the exhibition. Actually, on the private view night, I think me and Rebecca didn't even meet each other on the private view night because I was upstairs and she was downstairs. But yeah, I have had a look around the rest of the exhibition, and I was aware of Joe Hogan's work for quite a few years, and I really love. I mean, it is basket weaving, but it's more than that. Some of them seem to be functional, and some are purely, they just seem to be based on, he's almost following how the materials work for him. I don't know, because I've actually never met him or talked about his work, but it just seems like he's responding to his medium, the natural materials that he uses so well. It's like he's almost drawing with the willow and the wood that he's using. And Katie's work as well looks absolutely incredible. I mean, that the skill that she is involved in the sort of engraving that she's doing into the metals is just absolutely phenomenal. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I would agree with Angie. I thought they were beautiful. Both exhibitions were lovely. I didn't get to meet either of them either. It was a bit, I sort of turned up and it was sort of quite bombarding and then we all left. But yeah, I think it's a well-named exhibition, isn't it? The Celebrating Nature.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, I was going to say, yes, I think it is, because we're all responding to nature in very different ways. And yeah, I just think it's, I mean, the Scottish Gallery, I think, are always very good at making sure that the whole exhibition space flows very, very well. And yeah, and I think the title was perfect. Yeah.
And do you work, I mean, you've said you Angie, that you're a painter and a printmaker. Rebecca, is it purely painting that you do?
Yes, just oil painting, really.
And how did you decide, I think you said you went to art college. How did you decide that that was for you? I'm always fascinated. My brother is a printmaker, but when he was younger, he was a great painter. And in the family, you always say, well, why don't you do more painting? But he's got his medium now that he kind of sticks with. And I was wondering how you came, first of all, Rebecca, to be a painter rather than working in other areas.
I think it's like, I think for me, oil paints do what I want them to do, and I mean, I don't know, I can't work in anything else now.
Well, that's the answer. It's that you've found how you work, and that's it. And
yeah, and I think that's it. I think I was also drawn to them because I love the whole. I love I've got a palette knife, and I've got a palette, and I've got my colours, and I just love the whole process of it, and I love the smell of it. I love the feel of the paint. It's tactile too, and I think that's a lovely thing about it. And then also it's very malleable. I find it a very malleable medium.
Sometimes it's almost sculptural, isn't it? I mean, when you see it, you could always touch it and get that sense from it.
Yeah.
And Angie, how did you come to decide this is how you're going to work?
Well, I went to art college in London, and I initially was on the sculpture course at Central, and then I realised fairly early on, I think it was in the first term, we had to do quite a few weeks of printmaking, which is compulsory. And the minute we went into this printmaking department, I suddenly realised that was actually what I wanted to do, because I'd never actually done it before. Right. And I think that is also, as Rebecca mentioned, to do with process, because I kind of walked in and you've got the amazing printing press, you've got the smell of the inks, you've got the smell of the oil on the printing press, you've got the rollers, the papers, the cutting tools, the whole experience of being in a print room suddenly felt 100% right as the place that I wanted to be. So there's a sort of link with sculpture in that you've actually got tools and kit and process, and I do like process. So I just fell in love with that, and then I basically wasn't doing very well on sculpture at all. I we had these amazing big studios at that point, which students would kill for now. I mean, absolutely amazing. And all I had in mind was my push bike and a skeleton that my friend at medical school had given to me, because I was stuck for ideas. I got a skeleton, and they were very happy that I changed. It was within the fine art department, so I switched, and so I did that printmaking for many, many years. But what is interesting, and I think quite a lot of printmakers say this, is that you can sometimes be, or certainly in the old days, you had the painters who were up there, and you had the printmakers that were just down a bit lower, really. And so I always did watercolors and drawings and collages towards my prints, but I never exhibited my watercolors or drawings until probably about, I'm not sure how long ago it was, maybe it's about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, maybe. But it's quite interesting that quite a lot of printmakers do say, oh, well, you know, because you were always a second class sort of citizen slightly in the fine art department. So it's quite interesting to now I do equal amounts. In fact, at the moment, I'm probably doing slightly more painting, and I really absolutely love to focus on my watercolors now, for solid periods of time, and that they're the focus of my work rather than just the starting point towards a print.
That's interesting. I never thought about a hierarchy in the art school, that some people are viewed differently to others. But also, both of you, it's the almost physical nature of what you do, certainly in terms of printmaking, and what you're talking about with your painting, Rebecca, that is as attractive as what the final piece will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also, for me also, color feels very physical too. I don't know whether it does for you, Angie, as well, but certain colors have a real physical quality to them, a presence as well, so the whole thing, I suppose, is a very physical process. A lot goes up in here, but also goes in your hands, and it's a lovely thing to be able to do, I think.
Yeah, Scotland's got a great tradition of artists working with nature. Do either of you have favourites or inspirations? I'll ask you, Angie, first.
Oh, well, Elizabeth Blackadder's a very big influence on me. Mm-hmm. Oh God, I go back. Joan Erdley, obviously, very, very important too. That's it's so funny when people ask you who your favourite artists are. I actually can't think. Oh, and a slightly unusual one in a way, or I sometimes feel it's unusual, is Edward Burrough, who was who did a lot of slightly surreal landscapes and sort of surreal figures, but he did the most incredible still life flower paintings that were actually quite surreal. And he could paint a vase of tulips with such intense colour, and they were watercolours, very, very saturated colours and intense, but they had an almost a sinister quality to them. They were so they had such a presence, and I really like this very strong way that he paints in watercolour. I also like Elizabeth Blackadder a lot, because she also grew a lot of the plants in her own garden that she was painting as well. And I've always admired her compositions, but also the way that she knew her plants. And I do want that feeling from a painter in any landscape or anything like that, the sense that they are actually there.
That's a lovely idea of knowing what you're painting. I guess both of you are saying that you know the landscape, or you know your plants kind of intimately. So that's what, why you can interact with them so well. And the idea of sinister tulips is an interesting one too.
I don't think mine are sinister. I hope not, anyway.
Rebecca, a similar question to you. Do you have any kind of favourites or inspirations in terms of Scottish artists working in nature?
Yes, I think Houston is a wonderful landscape artist too. Very different from my paintings, but very powerful and very captivating work. And also James Morrison for his clouds. Just he knew his landscape.
Yeah.
He knew it inside out. And I suppose for colour, an older painter, D.Y. Cameron. I love his prints too, and I love his etchings. You know, he captures light very beautifully in his etchings. But for his oil paintings, his colour, very vivid, very strong colours.
And I was wondering, how do you feel when you exhibit, when your work goes public? Is there a kind of concern? How is that when you put it out there? Because the idea that, you know, you're so intimately involved with what you're doing and then you're sharing it with other people, is that something that you enjoy? Rebecca, I'll start with you.
It's a mixed bag, really, of feelings. I remember just before the day the show was about to open, I went down and I popped in briefly, and I saw the work up, and I just thought, just quite relieved, because I had this awful image of, I don't know, like 3-year-old scribbles on the wall.
That's not how I remember it.
I don't know. I do get quite. I think inside I get more stressed than I realise I do. Yeah, and then I always wonder, you know, I think no one's going to want to look at this too, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of feelings that go on with it.
And Angie, I can see you laughing along. I think you maybe feel similar.
Well, no, it's just that once I had a nightmare the night before I was dropping off work for an exhibition, and I dreamt that the gallery came to look at my work in the plant chest drawer, and I opened it up, and when I opened the drawer, it was full of portraits of dogs and cats that I'd done, really bad ones, and they were saying, "Well, this is just dreadful. This is just dreadful." So clearly, it's a little bit the effect of going to do an exam,
Yeah.
or, you know, it's like you work towards it, and I think unless you're supremely confident, there must be a degree of thinking, "Oh, I hope this is all right." But I've been supposed to been exhibiting for a long time now. But what always amazes me is the work goes off in a portfolio, and then it comes back in these frames, and suddenly it's filling a whole gallery space. And once it's in frames, it does become another thing,
Right.
To a degree. I mean, I really enjoy exhibiting my work, and I want people to enjoy my work, and I want people to see it. And I also want to earn my living as an artist, and so therefore, you know, that's all sort of tied in. But at the same time, you do the work that you want to do, and that's the most important thing, that you should do that.
Yeah.
So there's always an element each time there'll be something that's a little bit different, or you've moved on, and you want that to have worked, and for the whole thing to hang together sort of cohesively, and there to be a good flow around the room of, you know, very, in my case, it's very bold paintings, then ones that have a lot of white space. And looking at Rebecca's work, there's this complete, it's very cohesive. It encapsulates the landscape that she spends time. It's a landscape that I know to a certain extent as well. And so the room works well. And that's what you ultimately want. And I think that's probably where the anxiety arises initially, is that your expectations and vision of what it's going to look like will be like that in its, because until that point it's been in your messy studio. Well, my studio is messy, I can't say whether Becca's is messy, but in your studio and just in a plant chest drawer, and then it's on white walls in a gallery. It's a big transition, really.
It's nice also seeing work together, you know, with yours upstairs, all the work talks to each other. So sometimes that's a nice thing about having an exhibition too. It's able to have that space where your work is presented, or one's work is presented as a unit, as one unit, not as individual things, and how they interact with each other, and how they talk to each other, and how they can amplify each other in ways, which is it's a lovely thing to see. And it's something that's just not in, you know, you give over control when you give it to the gallery, you know. And it's nice to see what other people can do with that.
Well, I guess with the theme being so kind of, you can interpret it in such different ways, that to see it all come together with different people, their interpretations of it, I mean, it must be a really kind of, when it's done, when it's correct, and as you said, the Scottish Gallery has got a reputation for doing these things well, then it must be a kind of sigh of relief.
Oh, yes, it is. I mean, I've always got, although for many years, me and my husband had a gallery where we exhibited other artists' work. I've always found it quite hard to hang my own work. I can hang other people's work quite well, but I find knowing how to hang my own work very, very difficult. And so, yeah, I've always had I've always had plenty of confidence that in galleries in their ability to do that. Yeah. But I think the thing that Rebecca says about the work talking to each other and being hung correctly is really, really important, because when you're in the studio, you're hoping that that's what you're going to achieve, but it's in a very different environment. And when it's in that space, it's got to work. And I think a person that can hang work well can make sure that there's a flow of around the room, which is, and getting the balance of white wall to image correct is that's a real skill.
Yeah. And I was going to ask what's next for you both, but maybe you just carry on. Maybe, you know, you're just constantly working. Is that the case, Angie?
What am I working on? The Scottish Gallery's got an exhibition coming up later in the year called Folk at Heart. I'm doing a couple of pieces of work for that, and actually my tulips are already flowering in my polycrub, which is it's a polytunnel, but it's from Shetland, so it's this incredibly insulated and strong polytunnel. So I'm working on some tulip paintings already, but then I've got a printmaking exhibition later in the year. So that's going to be based on a mixture of wildflowers and also cultivated plants. So that's my kind of year, what's coming up.
And what about yourself, Rebecca?
Just more of the same, I hope, just carrying on. Yeah, just I've got lots of work planned out, and the works take a wee while to paint, so you know, I think the show's only got about 15 pictures, but it took about a year to paint those 15. Yeah. So
and I guess because you're both working with nature, is that it's continually changing. That's the one certainty, is that things will change and be different and all of those things.
Yes.
Sorry, Angie, you go.
Okay. Yeah, it does. It is always progressing. The season's always progressing, and then there'll be a point when I'm always drawing or focusing on certain plants, and then I'm going to focus on them. Then I'll bring other elements in. There'll be another plant that I spot when I'm painting something else. It might be, if I was painting yellow rattle, I'd spot that there's some scabious or something else, or I might spot that there's a feather or something else on the riverbank or something. So then that becomes something that's incorporated in the work. So over the years, my work's always progressed. I've never jumped from subject to subject. It's always been a progression. And so there will always be, there's always the next thing. And actually a tutor at college always said to me, particularly with printmaking, because there's quite a lot of process, he would say, while you're working on one thing, you can already be thinking about the next. And it's sort of, it's still true for me with painting. There'll be a part of a painting which I'm thinking, oh, I think I'm going to focus on that color or that composition or that subject next time. So there's always the next thing.
And Rebecca, yourself? Yes,
just this, very true, like Angie. And I think it's almost like watching a glacier flow sometimes. You know, it doesn't happen quickly. It happens just, for me, it's always the landscape. So if there's a progression in the work, it's almost like zoning in and then carrying on zoning in, and there's always something else to discover or something else to look at. And it's quite an internal thing too, I'm not very good at explaining why I want to do it, but it just happens.
It happens, yeah. Well, thanks to both of you for taking the time to talk to me. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for asking us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem at all. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.